That's the ones we accept are officially refugees or internally displaced people, 65 million. But we're forgetting something like 900 million more people who are on the move because of changing conditions. So very important to get in our minds that in the real numbers of people out there who are in search of better perspective, in search of capacities and resources, are many more. 250 million migrants. Well, I'm a migrant. I'm not a poor person, but I'm a migrant. But there are many more who cannot stay anymore in those places where they live currently. Climate change, whether we want it or not, rising water levels. Even in Louisiana, in the US, people have to move away from the coastal regions because of rising water levels. They're on the move. Of course, they are probably a bit better off than those in Bangladesh. 20 to 30 million people having to move away from the coastal regions. And where do they go? They go into urban centers. So we have a very, very rapid urbanization ongoing, and that is actually, in fact, the real true challenge. 2.5 billion more people will move into urban centers within the next 20 to 30 years. A city like Lagos is going to increase by 20 million people within the next 15 years. It got already 21 million people. Where they don't move into? The shanty towns, the slums, informal settlements, and so on. So now, coming back to the overall resources, we cannot continue business as usual with the 5 euros into a box. And now we're coming to innovation, to disruption in all of this. We need to move on and understand that the real challenge is of how we get resources to those people who are dispossessed, in disadvantaged regions, in areas of crisis, in a different way. Is that going to be fixed through guys like me, physically, like missionaries, traveling from A to Z, and becoming maybe with a cargo plane full of blankets? That's what my life was in the United Nations, in UNHCR, and many other places, distributing tents and feeling good about that. It's not going to be this anymore. We have to change the way of how we look at the distribution of resources. And here we're coming to the topic which we have today, tech, disruptive tech. But tech is also knowledge. It's how do you transfer knowledge? How do you transfer what we can already do? As I keep on saying, we have a solution for everything already. We can produce energy out of many things. We have solutions to waste management. We have solutions to water purification. We have solutions to access or have access for everyone with the help of modern fintech, for instance, banking the unbankable, insurance for the uninsured. All these things are in fact available, but we're not sharing them. Now, breaking that down from the theoretical level, I want to move to the very last real job I did with the United Nations, 2013 and 14, before I decided to quit the United Nations, where I was a civil servant. That was a refugee camp, the refugee camp in northern Jordan called Zatari. It became very famous. I made it famous because I told another story about the camp. I said that place has actually become a city. Like all our camps have become at some point a city, the official camps, transforming into settlements. I was last week in Venice. Venice started as a refugee camp. Venice was built by people a long time ago who fled from us, the barbarians, built a safe place in the lagoon. So here they started safety, and it became a thriving city. And so looking at that, I also decided in Jordan, when I became the manager, or as I called myself, the mayor of that camp, to move in another direction, recognizing that that space would be there for a long time. And at this moment, I want to show you a movie about this camp of about 100,000 refugees, because we brought in a different capacity. That is where disruption starts. We brought in the city of Amsterdam as our partner to design a refugee camp, not to have anymore a storage facility, but to recognize that spaces need to be looked at with a projection into the future. So we will have a quick look at this very short movie.
This is Zaatari Camp in Al Mafraq province in Jordan. It hosts many Syrian refugees, and even more refugees are present in Al Mafraq's towns and cities. Urbanization has accelerated in the crisis and influences the economy, transport, public services, and so on for both Syrians and Jordanians. How does one plan for this area if we do not know what the situation will be like in 2026? How can current work on infrastructure and services also generate longer-term value? A project by the City of Amsterdam and VNG International is adding municipal spatial planning to the humanitarian effort. What does this mean? There are different levels of spatial planning. There is the level of the camp, its grids of roads and sewers, and the location of the hospital, the supermarket, etc. Then there is the level of the camp and its adjacent towns, their connections and layout. Housing here, commerce there, industry there. And there is the level of the province, situated at an international trading crossroads. This is an animated model of the camp made by Amsterdam's Spatial Planning Department. Zaatari Camp gives structure to the space. The camp's infrastructure will remain for a long time after the tents and cabins are gone. Both the camp and the province stand to gain greatly if investments made now remain useful in the future. How fine or coarse should the grid of roads and services be? What are good places for shops and for the hospital? We will still need shops and a hospital if Zaatari Camp eventually becomes a residential area. This is what this may look like in 2026. But what if Zaatari Camp was to become a transport and logistics center? This is what that may look like in 2026. This illustrates what municipal planners call scenario planning. Spatial plans need to expand rather than constrain Al Mafraq's future options. Investment in the grids needs to balance control with flexibility for people and firms. That way, improvements during the humanitarian emergency can create value for Jordan after the crisis.
So, based on these experiences, we have worked for the last couple of years on new models to deal with the flow of people, with the changes which take place, the transformation of our world into a more urbanized world, the transformation of societies because of climate change, accompany the displacement rather than trying to prevent it, but in a positive way, in a connected way. So we brought together a global network of those who can provide the skills, the technical expertise, the tech, the finances, all the different elements which are required to set up and develop new spaces. Well, it is in fact taking up what Roma called the charter city concept, push it further into what we call special development zones as the way forward to connect dispossessed populations, people on the move, with the knowledge and the technologies we possess collectively in the world. We do have the ways of connecting anybody at any moment. And so therefore, even for places which seem to be so desperate as Somalia or Libya, where we work as we speak, it is possible to make that all available. That is the truest disruption, and that is the true way forward instead of working and continuing to beg for charity. It is making the knowledge of the world accessible to the dispossessed populations. With that, very short presentation of a very complex theme. I would invite a couple of questions. We have still a few minutes to discuss. Any questions?
Thank you. My name is Michal Kaczmary. I'm originally with the American Chamber of Commerce, a business association, but it's my part-time job. I'm also active in development and humanitarian activities with some local NGOs here that we work with some projects in Kenya and Sudan. It was very interesting to see the video and the potential multiple usage of the space, but that still doesn't, at least to me, resolve the acute problem of those people. It sort of offers a longer term solution for the transit country or for the country that for mid or short term needs to help. But how about those people? I mean, those are at the end of the day should be the focus.
Well, I think one very important element is as well to change the narrative of a good refugee is a returning refugee, or prevention of migration. Well, migration, we are all result of migration. You are a result of migration. I am. I mean, all of us. Very few people actually in the end return, which is brutal, and it doesn't mean we're giving up on acquired rights or something like that, but people move on. Refusing the idea that people have come and not integrating them into an economic, social future, basically, means that we are actually reducing our own capability to move on. That's why, in fact, the arrival of people should be seen as an opportunity. Here in Jordan, for instance, and that is what this film doesn't say, and it would be a longer discussion. In Jordan, we use that as a trigger for work with all the municipalities in northern Jordan, which had already, if you want, a development deficit, which had already issues with transportation, actually modernization, becoming more smart, becoming actually more connected to modern city planning and urban planning and service delivery. So that whole project moved much further. So seeing, in fact, demographic changes as an opportunity is the way forward. And I give you another example, Bangladesh again, where we're talking about 1 million Rohingya people who will never go back. Forget it. I mean, the reality is they will stay in Bangladesh. So we're constantly concerned with now finding resources for 1 million people in camps, instead of looking at the requirements of 20 to 30 million people in total, including the Rohingya, for work, settlement, and places where they can live properly. Instead of what we will see, if we don't address that collectively, sort of a creeping migration into Dhaka, which will become a hot spot in terms of tensions and violence and so on and so forth. So rather than saying, no, we try to prevent, accompany what is a fact. People changing, transformation of societies, of demographics, and use that as a real way forward to change and actually push innovation. So change becomes the opportunity for social innovation and change. Any more questions? Don't be shy. I mean, basically what we're really trying to push, and it's a global network of people who work together, of experts, of people come either from the humanitarian side, who come from the business side, the private sector, is how we connect that knowledge. So I was recently speaking to, for instance, a group of insurance companies. They have a very big response, in fact, in their pockets, if they wish. It's insuring the uninsurable. Like banking the unbankable has become today possible with digitalization of mobile phone outreach. And an interesting observation, you will find a mobile phone in every dispossessed, poor environment today, because the mobile phone industry is one of the few industries which has understood that those, let's say, 4 billion poorer people of the world actually have a very high potential. The way of how the mobile phone industry has contributed to positive changes in many societies is actually amazing. Access to telemedicine, access to better management of crops and weather forecasts, banking. I just was in Kenya a couple of weeks ago. Of course, with M-Pesa and digital facilities, everybody can transfer money. So these are changes which make much more sense than actually distributing in-kind assistance. And like maybe a last example, in 2009 in Pakistan, and then 2010 in Pakistan. In 2009, we had 2.5 million people displaced because of fighting between the Taliban and the government forces. The best response was a cash scheme of the government based on biometric identification, issuing to 400,000 families debit cards, Visa debit cards, which actually allowed them to draw cash. That was an amazing scheme. And when a year later, I was at the time the Deputy Special Envoy of the United Nations in Pakistan, the floods, the first big floods because of very strong monsoon rains, displaced 10 million people. The only response possible was that cash scheme, which in the middle of the floods actually helped to have people access what was for them the most important, cash. So that is an example of how a country like Pakistan actually, in making the right decisions, in modernizing, in digitalization, in using identification as a means and tools to provide assistance and support, made a major impact on their own people. So whilst the humanitarian system had to bring in hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of aid workers to try and distribute in-kind assistance, that Pakistani scheme run by the National Authority for Data Management and Registration and the presidency was much more efficient and pushed debit cards to 1.4 million people in 2010. So there is a very big revolution ongoing where the tech industry on one side, but then also the planners, the people with the capacities can come together and can be connected to an agile, very mobile, very responsive way of tailoring and customizing responses to the very environment and to the crisis. If there's more no more questions, then we can stop. Now there is one here.
My name is Dominic Wu, and I'm volunteering here. I have a question because you were talking about the negative notion of migration, which is something which has always existed in a way. But my question is, what are the means to change that notion? What are the means to change that discourse? Because even like while talking about migration, we usually use the word waves. Like waves are usually like negative, like there's waves that's, and when we use these kind of words, like about people, it usually already sets the context which is negative. So do you have any means or propositions how to change that discourse? Thank you.
Okay, we have waves when there's a specific shock somewhere, right? So you have a wave when there's a war, when there's an earthquake, when there is a big flood, then you have that shock and you have many people moving somewhere else. So that is extreme, and then things what you saw on this little movie, then camps are set up or new settlements are set up as a response to that. And either people, of course, return pretty fast if it was just a flood, or they don't. And in most cases, I mean, historically seen, they don't. And then you have, of course, sort of that steady flow which is happening because conditions are changing and people move on, and yes, that is maybe also perceived as a wave. We shouldn't mix sort of a discussion on multicultural, multi-religious societies and how that comes together, and migration. Migration is all of us. Having a more complex sort of coming together of different cultures and so on, yeah, there's different ways of managing this. I always mention the Emirates, for instance. Dubai is an example of many, many different cultures and many, many different people coming together. It's very tough. It's a very tough regime. There's very strict rules. But still, there's 7 million migrants living in that space and working. Not all of them are abused. Let's be clear. But it's an interesting model where, and I also say that, half of the 7 million migrants living in the Emirates come, by the way, from conflict zones. So for me, the Emirates do more for refugee management than the whole of Europe, because they have at least 3-4 million people from very difficult parts of the world. So it's tricky, but it's an example of where it functions. Now, if we, and that's what we are trying to propagate, and we did some work with the previous Austrian Prime Minister last year to come up with a way of looking at Africa, at this African threat which is put forward to us by many, I would say, populist politicians, saying they will all come to us. But bringing in a new idea and a new concept of creating spaces where people can function and live, of course, you wouldn't have the waves. You would have a natural migration continuing, but you wouldn't have sort of the bigger waves we are so afraid of. But it's really important that we wake up and we understand that, yes, there is a major transformation happening, and the major transformation can be addressed through bringing together the knowledge of creating functional spaces. That's what we're calling as a concept, special development zones, bringing together all that expertise and so on. And that mixed with clever use of fintech, the clever use of support to businesses, that combination can actually lead and contribute significantly to the reduction of the waves, the reduction of conflicts coming out of the, let's say, the competition for resources. Again, I mentioned Lagos. If Lagos grows by another 20 million, you have 40 million people living in one city. If that is not managed properly, you can imagine the potential for violence, the potential for, of course, criminality and so on, and then the further move on. One more.
Sorry for prolonging, just one more observation. Talking about the example, successful case of Kenya and the M-Pesa banking between cell phones, which is a great thing. I had the experience with that. Then you mentioned the example in Pakistan. Both seem to me that there were basically ideas from within those countries. They were in the, the spin-offs of the big global tech giants. So those were successful cases of local people who know the conditions, who knew the problem, who knew the crisis. They came up with something very creative. So it seems to me that during this sort of innovative approach in these countries, in conflict zones, in countries with the need of aid, rather than just increasing the financial support that we do. Would you agree, or would you?
I mean, this is what we're doing, for instance, for Libya. We just agreed on setting up what we call a partnership and business accelerator for Libya. It's driven by Libyans. It's financed by Libyans. They say, okay, we got the money. We're selling 1.2 million barrels a day, so we have $80 to $100 million a day. So we should be able to take care of ourselves. But what we look for is eventually, let's say, partnerships, ideas, connectivity to the outside world to get maybe new ideas in addition. We don't look for money. We probably look for co-investment. But we want to find solutions. So we have, over the last 6 months, put a net over Libya, if you want, and so building up a pipeline of requirements, but also opportunities. Many of these opportunities have something to do with municipal management, for instance. So if you think about Libya, you think about something horrible, militia fighting and so on. No, there are mayors out there who are looking for solutions in terms of waste management. They want tech for waste management. They want to know what is the best garbage truck, what is the best technology to manage waste in my city. Libyan mayors. So I find that is very encouraging, actually, because, again, it's driven by them. The issues are driven by them. And our job is through basically an incubator, through a platform, through what we call an agile, very intelligent tool to help to find the right resource, which combines knowledge which is coming from outside with their finance, with their requirement, and of course them doing the stuff. So actually, in conclusion, we think that in most countries, with a very few exceptions, and of course except the very emergency-like response when crisis really hits, most of that can be done through collaborative connectivity, through connecting the different dots, building up on what national, local capacities exist. We've been planning to do the same with Somalia. I worked twice in Somalia. Somalia is the same. There are very, very successful businesses running in Somalia. Somalis have a lot of capital. They have a lot of ideas, but sometimes they need maybe the right partners to work with. So it's not as we used to do before, where we really, as I say, come as missionaries and save somebody. No, they can do it themselves. Maybe on that, particularly diaspora is something very, very powerful. And many countries in crisis have come out of crisis because of diaspora, because of trusting as well new ideas coming in. Rwanda is another example which has become a leading tech nation where every single village is now being connected with a cable. And I've seen Rwanda after the genocide. And is now a country which is really advanced, also in terms of startup support, also in terms of getting new ideas going. We can do that everywhere. We are supporting a startup accelerator in northern Jordan now, which has done amazing work with Syrian and Jordanian businesses, helping them to produce in a fab lab their basic first prototypes, scaling it up, business support, coaching, global support works very well. As well, increasingly digital IT jobs become something very accessible for everyone. We're having a project in Jordan again, in Amman, where in 4 months, through bootcamp methodology, people are being trained and get from zero to a job in coding. And that stands against 20,000 jobless IT engineers in Jordan who are not adapted to the market. So, I mean, there is a lot which we can do, and that is, in fact, the aid of the future. Besides, very last remark, maybe a more fair trade policy would help as well. That's, for me, still one of the sour points when we look in our relationship with our neighbors. Be more just in the trade and try to keep local markets alive instead of killing them. With those words, thank you very much, and have a good conference.